In this lesson, I'm going to be taking a look at solving single-step literal equations. And just as a little context, when I talk about a literal equation is an equation where your final answer will still be in terms of letters, not just numbers. So you will not end up with an answer that's like x equals 5 or something like that. You're more likely to end up with something that says like x equals y over b or something along those lines whenever we solve a literal equation. But our processes are exactly the same as they are when solving them with numbers. So take a look at this particular problem. We have a equals xm, and we're being asked to solve this one for m. Well, if there were numbers in there, like I'll make up an example of 10 equals 2m, if you wanted to solve that, you would divide both sides by 2, right? Because the 2 is what's currently multiplied by the m. The same thing is going to be true with this one over here. It's just that I'm not multiplying it by 2, I'm multiplying it by x. And so I'm going to divide both sides of my equation here by x. And yes, make sure you're doing it to both sides of the equation. When I'm talking about the equation, the two sides are separated by the equal sign. So I do it once on the left of the equal sign and once on the right of the equal sign. All right, so then on the left side, I have a divided by x. Now, I could write it actually like that. I could write a divided by x equals m as my final answer. Or, I tend to think it looks a little bit nicer if I write it as a over x equals m. They both mean the same thing, and they both are valid ways of writing it. I just think it's a little bit tidier to just write it in more of that fraction format. But of course, the key thing is that you know that they both, in fact, do mean the exact same thing. This problem is now done. We know what m equaled. M equals a over x. And so that's what we put in as our answer and move on to the next problem. And that next problem, we're solving this one for t. You'll notice, whenever you're solving literal equations, you always have to check and see which one am I actually solving for. Otherwise, if x pops up in there, you might be tempted to automatically solve for x, and it might be that you're not supposed to solve for x. You might be supposed to solving for w or something. So in this case, we're solving for t. And you'll notice that right now, the part that's in the way of t being by itself is this plus r. So that means I have to get rid of the plus r. And just like if there was a number in there, I can get rid of the plus r by subtracting it from both sides. So I'm actually going to subtract r from both sides of the equal sign, which then on the left-hand side leaves me with t, and r minus r is 0. So yes, it does go away. And then on the right side, we have n minus r. And we now have what t equals. Remember, we were trying to solve it for t, and we now have t equals, which means we're done. T equals, in this case, n minus r. And on to our next problem here. In this case, we're solving for b, and we have by equals x. Okay, well, we saw a problem like this a couple problems ago at the very start, but in that case, the variable that we're solving for was actually the second one in the multiplication, not the first one. What does the order of multiplication change? Nothing, because it's multiplication. And remember, order in multiplication does not change anything. And so I'm going to approach it the same way, which is that right now it's b times y, and I want to get rid of the y. So I'm going to undo that multiplication by dividing. And I have to divide both sides of the equal sign by the same thing. So on the left side, I have b, and on the right side, I have x divided by y. Or if you're like me and prefer to write it a little bit shorter even than that, you can write it as x over y. Please do remember that those two ways of saying it are indeed exactly the same. Whether I write it with the division symbol or the fraction symbol, it still means the same thing. Enter it either way as your answer. As we now head into our next problem, we're solving this time for q. And again, this one looks like a problem that we saw earlier, except that the order is a little different. This time, the variable that we're solving for is the second one in the addition statement. But what's that going to change? Well, since it's addition, It changes nothing because order within addition doesn't change anything. And so if I want to get the q by itself, I need to get rid of the n. And since it's being added to n, I'm going to subtract n from both sides. And when we do that then, on the left side, n minus n is 0, so it does indeed cancel out, which is what we wanted. So I'm left just with q on the left side, and on the right side I have t minus n. There's nothing else we can do with those other than just writing it as t minus n. And so t minus n is our answer of what q equals. Now in our next problem, we have subtraction working its way in there. Well, in this case, we're trying to solve it for c, because of course we're always checking to see which variable we're trying to get by itself, which means that we're trying to get rid of the b out of the right-hand side here. And you'll notice then, since we're subtracting b, the way that we're going to be able to move it then is that we will have to add the b to both sides, because that undoes a subtraction by b. And of course, we'll check that as we go. So on the left side, I need to do y plus b, and they are different letters, so that's as good as I can make it, just y plus b. And then on the right side, the c is still there, and then negative b plus b is the way that you're going to read this to kind of figure out what that gives you when you add them. And a negative b plus a positive b will equal 0. Because anytime you add something to its opposite, like 2 and negative 2, or 5 and negative 5, it always equals 0, even when it's negative b and b. And so then it just equals c on the right-hand side, and so then this is our final answer. Here in the last problem from this particular video, we're going to be taking a look at a division problem, because of course a fraction is the same as division. In this case, we have n over r equals y, and we're trying to solve this equation for n, which means I have to get rid of the r out of the left-hand side. So right now it's n divided by r, so I'm having to undo dividing by r. The opposite of dividing by r is multiplying by r. So we are going to multiply both sides of our equation by r. On the left-hand side, that does indeed cancel out the r in the denominator, and therefore we are just left with n on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, we're going to be doing y times r, which I can just write as yr. Or you could write ry, or you could put the multiplication symbol in there and write y times r. It doesn't matter, those little details. The tidiest way is just to write it without the multiplication symbol, but it doesn't hurt anything if you put it in there.